In the shadow of the Liberty Bell, a different kind of history was once told. For 16 years, the President's House Memorial stood as a testament to the 9 enslaved people held by George Washington on this very ground. But last month, following a federal directive, that history was stripped away, literally. Today, February 10th, the community is back at 6th and Market. They aren't just here to protest a policy, they're here to restore the truth.
In 2002, in late May, early June of 2022, there was a newspaper article indicating that the Liberty Bell Center, which then was at 5th and Market, had to move because it was too cramped, too crowded, and too congested. And by the way, at the time I was working with the great Charles W. Bowser, Esquire. Between him and Cecil Moore, I don't know who's the greatest. They're both the greatest. Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali greatest. But my point is, 2002, newspaper article, Liberty Bell Center has to move from 5th and Market, 1 block west of 6th and Market. Charles Bowser introduced me to the great Mary Mason, the voice of black Philadelphia, I guess from the 80s to the early 2000s. And every time Mary Mason was on vacation, she'd have me sitting in as a guest host. So I announced to the black audience that, hey, the Liberty Bell Center is moving. They said, interesting, but not really relevant to us. I also told them the news in 2002 that the new site of America's first White House, right here, 6th and Market. Back in 1790, it was called the President's House, the Executive Mansion, the Robert Morris Mansion, but it served as America's first White House under something called the Federal Act of 1790. And this Federal Residence Act of 1790 basically said this: hey, we're going to make Washington, D.C. the capital, but right now it's swampland. While we're putting that together, we're going to make Philadelphia the temporary capital. That's why America's first White House was here. So let me back up. Liberty Bell Center moves because they needed more space. Second thing, they come here to 6th and Market because that's where the space was. And this is important, they found out, or I should say remembered, that America's first White House was here. Believe it or not, this site was uncovered and disclosed to the National Park Service in 1978. And I'm not going to breach any confidential communications I had, but I spoke to an official from either the National Park Service or Independence National Historical Park who confided in me. He said, Mike, we knew this since 1978. We weren't going to say anything because it was going to be politically and historically embarrassing. So they kept it under the cover. Remember what I said now, because it's going to be an exam after this. 2002, Liberty Bell Center moves from 5th and Market to 6th and Market. Second thing, 6th and Market is America's first White House. But the third thing we found out is that America's first White House, under George Washington, 9 black men, women, and children were held illegally at this site. Now, you heard me say illegally. You might say, well, yeah, slavery is bad, but it wasn't illegal. It existed for 246 years, 1619 to 1865. But there's a catch. In Pennsylvania, they had the Gradual Abolition Act of 1780. And that basically said this: if you bring enslaved people, by the way, 7 minutes left. If you bring enslaved people into Pennsylvania, after 6 months, they can petition for their freedom. So George, remember, that's 1780. George Washington comes in 1790, 2 years later. And he realizes what the law says, kind of, sort of, I'll explain it. So every 5 months, 29 days, he would take them across state lines and bring them back. That was known as, quote unquote, rotating the slaves. Let me digress for a second. We in the African community don't call our enslaved ancestors slaves. They weren't slaves. They were carpenters. They were soldiers. They were fishermen. They were priests. They were human beings that just didn't have enough guns. That's the only reason. So they're not slaves, because a slave is a thing. Our ancestors are not things. So I don't want it to be too politically correct, but just let's refer to them as enslaved Africans or enslaved African descendants, or the enslaved, but not slaves. Let me get back on track. So once we found out about the move of the Liberty Bell Center, 6th and Market President's House, and George Washington enslaved 9 of the 316, I told you how he tried this rotating thing, because he came 10 years after 1780. But here's the catch. Because the Quakers controlled the state legislature 8 years after the first Gradual Abolition Act. 1788, they filled in that gap. They said, hey, we found out people are quote-unquote rotating the slaves. If you do that, we'll expedite their release and impose a heavy fine against you. So George Washington, who came 2 years later in 1790, wasn't a law skirter. He was a law breaker. Yeah. But I got to give George credit. At least he's not a 34 felony count convicted felon. So at least George gets that. I got so much more to share, but really, it's cold out here, and the ancestors said, come on, man, we're not ready to be out here for 2 and 3 hours. So let me wrap this up in 5 minutes. It was really like, I already covered like 8 or 9 minutes, but 5 more minutes. But here's the thing I want to bring it up to. So remember, Liberty Bell Center, moves, 6th and Market, President House. Third thing, George Washington slaves 9 of his 316. And by the way, when I say it's going to be exam at the end, I mean that. Some history books tell you George Washington enslaved 317 at Mount Vernon. He actually enslaved 316, counting 1 twice. That might be a Jeopardy question, so make sure you remember that. So of the 316, he held 9 right here. That's when my group came together in June of 2002. We met in Charles Bowser's office, and we decided to form a group called ATTAC, A-T-A-C, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. And we did something that was strategic. For a revolutionary grassroots organization, we were clearly strategic. We wrote letters to every black elected official in Philly on the local level, on the state level, and on the federal level. So if you were in city council in 2002 and you were black, you got a letter. If you were mayor in 2002, you got a letter. If you were a state rep or state senator and black based in Philly, you got a letter. If you were a congressperson and was black in Philly, you got a letter. Now, by the way, we included Congressman Bob Brady, and I'm glad we did. 1, he got a lot of black friends. That's important. And number 2, let me explain in a second. So we sent these letters out immediately. Mayor John Street wrote a letter to us and said, hey, I didn't know anything about this. I'm going to now form something called the Mayor's Oversight Committee, and I'm going to kick in $1.5 million to jumpstart it. A couple months later, the Honorable Bob Brady and the Honorable Shaka Fattah kicked in $3.5 million. So now we were on the map. One thing I didn't say that I really need to kick in is this. I started out by talking about how I'm the angriest black man in America. When this issue of slavery was told to us, revealed to us, uncovered to us, we were outraged, we were angry, and we decided we had to do something. And I wasn't just outraged and upset, I felt betrayed. Here's why. I was born and raised in Philly. Never heard about slavery in Philadelphia at America's first White House. I went to the greatest school. Sorry, Central, sorry, Girls High, but Masterman. And going to Masterman, I didn't hear anything about this. I then went on to the oldest HBCU. Sorry, Lincoln, but 1837 comes before 1954. But anyway, it's all good. But my point is this. So I went to Masterman, went to the oldest HBCU, went to the largest university on the planet for law school, Ohio State University, and never, ever heard about it. And that's why ATTAC had to come together. So we fought the good fight for 8 solid years, from 2002 up until 2010. And on December 15, 2010, write this down because the exam is coming shortly. December 15, 2010, there was the grand opening right here where you stand of the first, this is important, the first slavery memorial of its kind.
Mr. Coard, you've called the removal of these signs a desecration as opposed to just a removal. Can you explain the spiritual and historic weight of what is happening here?
Africans have always been spiritual as opposed to religious. Spiritual just means that you recognize that there's a force out there. That force might not be a divine intervener, but even if you accept the notion of the Big Bang Theory like I do, something had to cause the Big Bang. So whatever that thing was, that's that spirit that makes things happen. And we in the African tradition recognize that spirit. And for us, that's why we do the libation at the beginning of every program, honoring our ancestors. For the guy in the White House to send his hatchet men, his vandals, his thugs out here with burglary type tools to not just peel off our history, but to rip it off the wall. The fact that they put a weapon and I do mean a weapon like that, on these spiritually important interpretive panels constitutes desecration. As I said, this site here is historic hallowed ground. When you defile hallowed ground, you engage in desecration. That's what this is.
You visited the storage facility where they're housing this. Can you describe to our viewers how the government is treating our history?
I almost cursed, like a piece of crap. That's how they're treating it. First of all, if you saw what happened on January 22 at about 2:57 p.m. when the federal government's vandals came here and essentially burglarized the site, you saw that they used these giant crowbars with no sensitivity or care, threw them in the back of a pickup truck, and took them about 2 blocks away to what I call Uncle Joe's garage. When I walked in there, without describing too much because the judge swore us to secrecy, we can't tell everything, but we went into a large storage type facility with this gigantic metal gate. The metal gate was unlocked, and when you walk in, it was a neat Uncle Joe's garage, but it was a garage nonetheless. These 34 hallowed items were strewn across the place. Some were just leaning up against the cement wall. Others were just laying down on the ground. And the problem is that the ceramic ones, the glass ones, had scratches, had dents, had marks. The metallic ones began to bow in a U-type shape. So when I said they treated those items as if they were trash thrown in Uncle Joe's garage, that's the best way to describe it. They have no respect for our history or anything else.
So what was your first reaction when you walked past here and saw that the exhibit panels were removed?
Yeah, so I was actually out of the country when I saw it, and my heart broke. I mean, obviously there's a lot of other cities where things are happening in the nation right now, but when something hits close to home, when you get proximate to an issue, it hurts that much more. So my heart was broke. I cried for at least 5 minutes, and then immediately after crying, I just got angry. And I was like, when am I back in Philly so I can get down here and fight with my community and my people to right this wrong and injustice? So it was activate after anger activism time.
You know, I wish I could say I was surprised, but not at all. I mean, especially with this administration, anything is possible. You know, expect the worst and then some. You know, I don't even know what else could he have up his sleeve yet. I'm sure there's a whole lot more to come. You know, so I wasn't surprised.
Devastated. I was, as a educator, as a social studies teacher who used to bring in students here that help organize field trips and other exhibits, and even bring in folks, other social studies people from around the country to do a tour of this location. It's just devastating when you see that this has been taken away, and it begs the question for me of whether this country is actually committed to moving forward, or is it committed to maintaining what it always has been, unfortunately, and that's anti-black, that's reinforcer of white supremacy.
I was really sad. For years, I've walked by this almost every day. My daughter's daycare was right over there, and so for many years we would walk by this exhibit and we would look at it and talk about it, both of my children. And every time I walked by here, there would always be crowds of people, and they'd be talking and discussing like what they were reading, really intrigued by what they had read, some surprised, some shocked. Nobody ever fell over in dismay or, suddenly was like their whole world was rocked. But I think what the people who created these panels, what they wanted was for people to talk about this history and to learn about it and to confront it.
This seems like an empty place. And I made the sign that I was about to photograph before you started interviewing me, which is celebration without reflection becomes empty display. And that's what we have here today. And a beautiful empty house that ignores, right, the lack of the placards just ignores history. And I have a personal connection to it too, because one of the placards that was removed actually had language on it for a Philadelphia story that I'm very heavily involved in.
My first reaction was anger, disappointment, And then I just remember what I learned in school a very long time ago, that history repeats itself. So if you don't know history, it's probably going to happen again.
So some people call this history divisive. How would you respond to someone who believes the idea of talking about enslavement here is a negative thing?
Well, I can't hold to that because I'm a history teacher. And so we believe, as a history teacher, you have to let the sources speak for themselves. The sources are the truth. How we interpret them is up to us. But the sources tell us the history, right? And so that history can't be denied, and we can't cherry pick what we want to teach or what we want to learn, even if it's uncomfortable or something that we're afraid of. And I have to say that in all the years that I have taught, young people have an amazing ability to understand human frailty and to understand that there is a past that is ugly, and that there's things that happen that are wrong. And they have an amazing ability to try and understand it. And I think we don't give them enough credit for their ability to understand our nation's past. And we should trust them because they're the ones that are going to lead us forward.
It's a reflection of this society not wanting to deal with its demons, its original sin, and that is that the first president of the United States owned slaves here at this location, and that folks need to know about that history in order for us to understand the true complexity of what this nation is all about. So when people say it's divisive, I would argue that it's divisive to leave out this history. It's divisive the fact that we didn't even know about this until we found and it was excavated in front of the Liberty Bell, and then it had to be fought for to even be here in the first place. So when people say divisiveness, I always think about, it's divisiveness if it challenges white supremacy.
Slavery is a negative thing, and enslaved Africans are a negative thing, but ignoring it doesn't. It's incomplete. It's just incomplete. And to say that leaving it out somehow makes things better, it just makes them darker. And I think, the world gets better when light is shed on stuff.
I guess because this is such a tourist area, and the last thing they want to acknowledge that it could possibly, we could have something to do with slavery here in Philadelphia. Everybody wants to show the whatever good side of history, and there could be no history without talking about slavery. So the truth, as they keep saying here, is we're supposed to tell the truth regardless. You might want to dress it up a little bit, but slavery is slavery because, it's still repeating itself in some shape or form. We're a slave to the dollar, so, it's here.
Yeah, I think those people who call the removing, what was here divisive, are honestly missing the point. So one of the speakers just said it earlier, and I talked about a little bit, getting proximate to an issue. So the executive order, which I actually read because I'm a lawyer, so I like to do my reading and research, essentially paraphrasing was, nothing can disparage America, right? Like that was the word. And so essentially by removing what was here, you're saying the people that were highlighted in that history aren't Americans, which is 1,000% false. I mean, at the time, they were only 3/5 of a human, but they were still Americans. And they were Americans more in the sense of they were actually born here, not to go on a tangent with what's going on with Minnesota and the rest of the country, but it's just people who are ignorant, people who simply have hate in their hearts and nothing else, and people who want to essentially whitewash history. I mean, to say that removing it restores America doesn't restore crap. I won't curse. Because the people that you removed were also Americans who were here, who, because they were enslaved and helped out the Washington family, he was only able to be as great of an individual as he was because he had enslaved people back at home doing things for him that he didn't have to worry about. So, it's just false hypocrisy. It's the fact that we want to hide the fact that our founding fathers, who were these great white men, weren't all great white men. They weren't all. They owned slaves, they were misogynistic, they were racist, and they had economic tendencies that were specifically put in place to marginalize a certain group of people. So I say to the people who say, hey, having that monument here is disparaging or it's disrespectful, wake up and just stop being stupid, I guess is the most polite way I can say it without cursing.
I don't think it's divisive. I think being informed about what has happened in the past will help prepare you for the future. our ancestors had to carry a card to prove that they were free. And Hispanic immigrants in the United States have to carry their passports to prove that they're citizens. History is repeating itself. So I don't think it's divisive. I think it is pulling people together to unite, to fight what is unjust.
Why was it important for you to be here today, physically, as opposed to just posting about it online?
To show my presence, to be here, to solidarity with my brother Michael Coard and Dana Carter and other folks here that have been putting on a wonderful rally for folks to kind of get together and demand that this be not removed, that it be put back, and that the history of folks fighting for this country to actually be all men are created equal. I just felt like if I didn't come, I would be a hypocrite to what I do in my own life.
I think because I got involved with Michael Coard and his mission, and I think in order to do a successful mission, it has to have community. I'm a big believer of the principles of Kwanzaa's 365. I celebrate Kwanzaa principles 365, and the first thing is Umoja, which is about community unity. So you can't do a real movement without people, and I want to be one of those people. Continue to be one of those people, I should say. I am one of those people. As I can.
Well, I always think it's important to show your physical support in person. I think there's power in the people being together and showing their unity in a cause, and so I think it's important, especially here, where we're right in the shadow of Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell, and I can't think of a more appropriate place where people gather together about liberty and freedom and about those concepts that we're fighting for.
Well, I just think being in the environment and seeing the energy that is emanating from the people around here is encouraging.
Yeah, so I think the history of my people and the history of any oppressed people has been you've got to show up, right? Everyone has their role in the movement. Some people are in the streets, some people are in the courtrooms, some people are in the back rooms making food, some people are opening their homes to house people. My background as a United States Force veteran, as well as a local Philadelphian, as well as a black woman in color, as well as an attorney, there's a lot of different roles I could have in the movement, but there's a power in the people showing up in a space to raise awareness of an issue, right? Like, we can post all we want till we're blue in the face, but that's not going to move the needle. What's going to move the needle is the power of people organizing and coming together, because there's a physical presence that comes with there's a power and a physical presence of people being together and moving a needle that you just can't actualize online. You can't feel that online. And so until it hurts their bottom dollar, we're not shopping at Target, we're not shopping at Amazon, we're not supporting individuals who will continue to contribute to a president and an administration that is destroying American history and just flat out telling lies. Until it hurts economically, until we show up and our physical presence makes things uncomfortable for them, they're not going to change, because that's just the way human relations and human interactions work. So being here in person, having a sign, standing in solidarity with myself and other allies, there was no other place I was going to be today.
Because when they took down a sign, they took down part of my project, part of 7 years of my life. I wasn't responsible for the language that was actually on the placard, and in fact, I have to confess, I wasn't even aware that it was on it until I went online to try and find what the actual words were that they removed, and they're actually hard to find online. But I saw that and said, give me a break, right? The words are true, but they're not disparaging, they're just telling the story. And if telling a story is bad or disparaging, then, we're in a bad place.
So, in your own words, why do you believe that's as important to not just tell half of the American story?
Half of the American story? Which half? You can talk about this half all you want to. I think this is the most important half, because the other one exists without it. It was built on slavery, the backs of the blood and slaves. So This is the most truth part of our history. There is others, but yeah, this needs to talk about first, last, and middle.
Because from a very fundamentalist, a 5-year-old could understand it, the best part of the story is the full story. Whether it's good, bad, ugly, indifferent, like you can't have an appreciation for what actually happened if you don't tell the full story. So, I mean, there's parts of my history that I don't like, right, of my people and things that we've done to each other or to other people, but you can't just erase over that for the full fact of the full story is how you learn, how you grow, and how you do not make the mistakes of the past. So, yeah, that's got to be it for me.
I would say it's problematic anytime when you distort history, you distort the present, and then you confuse the future. And since we all know that time is not linear, it actually overlaps, what we're doing right now, right here in this situation, is going to be in the future already. And this demand, this fight is already, we won. They just don't know it yet.
There's lots of different voices and stories in American history. And when we only tell one side or one voice, we lose out on the panoply that is America, right? And it's important to hear all these different voices and to give them, to hear them as Americans. And I think that when we say that some history is more acceptable than others, then we're doing a disservice to the people and to our country in denying that.
We lose a sense of where we come from. I'm first and foremost a family historian, and I've spent a long part of my life sort of digging in and finding out where my people came from, and it's provided me with a sense of place. And my work with the Ganges has provided me with a sense of place, especially in Philadelphia, where I'm not from. But these stories happened here, where we are standing right now. They happened here in Philadelphia. They didn't happen at some theme park in Southern California that was with a sort of a reproduction of Independence Hall. It's here. And we Philadelphians, and I consider myself a Philadelphian now, we Philadelphians have a responsibility and a duty to make sure that the stories are told. It's here, not anywhere else, here.
American history is lost if we only tell half of it, because this country was built on immigrants. Unless you were a Native American, you came from someplace else. So your history must be told.
We're looking at why the full picture of American history is under threat. The Liberty Bell bears a famous inscription to proclaim liberty to all inhabitants. But when we strip the names and the stories of the enslaved people who lived and labored right here from our public square, we aren't just losing a monument, we're breaking the promise inscribed on that bell. You cannot celebrate the birthplace of liberty while simultaneously evicting the history of those who were denied it. To restore the truth is to finally let the bell ring for everyone. My name is Shamel Jordan with PhillyCAM Voices.
And this demand, this fight is already, we won. They just don't know it yet.
In a new society, it's multicultural and everything flows. I say, okay, let me ask you this question. And I ask it as a criminal defense attorney for the last 30 years. Today, in 2026, you're driving up Temple University on Broad Street, 2 o'clock in the morning. Lights and sirens from a police car pull up behind you. And as the cop gets out of his car and approaches you, you could be a white driver or a black driver. Which would you select? Those are rhetorical questions that answer why we need to fight. And when I wrap this up in 8 minutes, because it hasn't started yet, but when I wrap this up in 8 minutes, I want you to ask yourself, what are you doing? We look back 200 years ago and say, damn it, if I was white 200 years ago, I'd have been with John Brown. Today is your John Brown moment. Okay. If you're black and say, I would have been with Nat Turner, today is your Nat Turner movement. You have to do something. Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing, without a demand. It never did, and it never will. It's all about people power.